At 6:45 a.m., I came home early from night shift. My bride was in my robe, but the coffee mug she was holding said, "World's Best Boss." He walked out of the bedroom next. At 6:45 in the morning, the sky was just beginning to pale, the kind of dim light that makes the streets look deserted, almost like a stage set waiting for actors to step into place. I parked my car at the curb outside our apartment building, bone-tired from another long night shift at the hospital. I had been working extra hours for months, trying to save up for our wedding, which was supposed to be the happiest milestone of my life. The thing about working nights is that you become invisible to most people's lives. Everyone else wakes when you sleep. Their daytime routine hums along while you're knocked out in a darkened room, earplugs stuffed in, trying to grab 6 hours of something that barely resembles rest. My fiancée, Lydia, used to complain about it. She said she felt lonely, that she wished I had a normal schedule, that she hated crawling into bed at night without me. I always told her the sacrifices were temporary, that once I finished paying off the last of my student loans and had a buffer for the wedding, I'd switch to day shifts. That morning, I thought I'd surprise her. We hadn't had breakfast together in weeks. I imagined slipping quietly inside, dropping a bag of pastries on the table, waking her gently, and watching her smile when she realized we had a morning together before she left for her office job. The thought kept me warm the whole drive home. I unlocked the door as silently as possible. Shoes off, keys placed carefully on the counter. I was halfway through pulling off my jacket when I noticed a faint sound, the clink of ceramic against wood. My head lifted, heart pausing. It came again. Someone was moving around in the kitchen. I walked forward on cautious feet, the cheap floorboards groaning despite my effort. And then I saw her. Lydia stood by the counter in my robe, her hair still messy from sleep, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. For half a second, everything looked normal, my fiancée starting her morning. But my eyes snagged on one detail that didn't belong. The mug. It wasn't one of ours. I knew every piece in our cabinet, down to the chipped handle on the blue one and the faded logo on the tourist cup I'd bought in Vienna years ago. This mug was new, glossy, and unmistakable. White letters printed across the front read, "World's Best Boss." And it hit me instantly. That wasn't mine. I froze in the doorway, staring. Lydia's head jerked up, her face registering something between surprise and guilt. She opened her mouth, but before any words came out, I heard the sound that would split my life into before and after. A door creaked open down the hall. Our bedroom door. Footsteps. Heavy, confident. And then a man emerged. Tall, sandy-haired, wearing a half-buttoned shirt and holding his tie in one hand like he'd just finished getting dressed in a hurry. He looked straight at me without flinching. The recognition was instant, a gut punch that knocked the air out of my lungs. Callum, Lydia's boss, the CEO of the mid-sized marketing firm where she worked. I had met him once at a holiday party, shook his hand, listened as he praised Lydia's creativity and work ethic. He had a reputation, charismatic, demanding, the kind of executive who saw himself as untouchable. And here he was, walking out of my bedroom, my fiancée's robe on her shoulders, his mug in her hands. My whole night shift existence collapsing into a grotesque tableau. The silence stretched, electric, like the moment right before a storm shatters the sky. Lydia's lips trembled as she finally managed to speak, her tone brittle. "You weren't supposed to be home yet." The stupidity of the statement nearly made me laugh. Not an explanation, not an apology, just shock at her schedule being disrupted. Callum, in contrast, didn't stammer. He walked straight to the counter, picked up his watch from beside Lydia's phone, and fastened it calmly around his wrist. The casualness of it, the utter lack of shame, made bile rise in my throat. My hands curled into fists, but I didn't move. Not yet. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Instead of exploding, instead of yelling or swinging, a cold clarity settled over me. If I lunged at him, it would end with me in handcuffs and him painting me as some jealous blue-collar fiancé who couldn't handle reality. If I screamed at Lydia, she would weep, plead, twist her words until I doubted my own eyes. So I said nothing. I let my gaze drift back to the mug. World's Best Boss. The arrogance of it. The symbol of everything I had been blind to while I worked myself half to death at the hospital. Lydia set the mug down with a shaky clatter. "Adrian, listen, this isn't what you think. It just happened. It doesn't mean." But her words dissolved into static. Because I remembered all the little things that hadn't added up. The sudden work dinners she'd started attending. The expensive necklace she wore one weekend, claiming it was a gift from a friend. The way she had grown impatient with my long shifts, as though my sacrifices were inconveniences rather than investments in our shared future. Callum checked his reflection in the microwave door, smoothed his hair, and walked toward the exit without sparing me another glance. He might as well have been leaving a hotel room. Lydia flinched as he brushed past her. The door clicked shut, and the apartment sagged into silence. She finally turned to me, her face pale, her robe hanging loosely as if even the fabric no longer belonged to her. She reached out a hand, but I stepped back. I still hadn't said a word. Inside, my mind was already racing, leaping ahead. If she was betraying me with him, how long had it been going on? What else had she lied about? And most importantly, what was I going to do with this knowledge? Because one thing became certain in that still kitchen with the smell of fresh coffee hanging in the air. This wasn't going to end with yelling and tears. This was going to end with consequences. And that was the first fracture. I spent the rest of that morning in a strange fog. I showered, dressed, even lay down for a short nap, pretending I hadn't just walked into the demolition of my future. Lydia hovered, trying to explain, throwing out half-truths and flimsy excuses, none of which matched the evidence burned into my brain. She swore it was recent, that it didn't mean anything, that she loved me and wanted our wedding to move forward. But every word she spoke only deepened my silence. I studied her carefully, like I was looking at a stranger. Because in a way I was. The Lydia I thought I knew, the woman I planned to marry, was gone. In her place stood someone I didn't trust, someone who had already chosen lies over honesty, selfishness over loyalty. By mid-afternoon, she was begging me to say something. Anything. I finally told her I needed to sleep before my next shift. I closed the bedroom door, locked it, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the morning in endless loops. But in between the loops, a new thought began to form. She had underestimated me. If she thought I was going to roll over, cry, and still marry her like nothing happened, she was dead wrong. If Callum thought he could walk into my life and walk out without consequence, he was even more foolish than his mug suggested. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was practical, material, calculated. And I had been funding the whole circus without realizing it. As I lay there, I felt a resolve settle in my bones. This wasn't going to be a simple breakup. This was going to be revenge. And it would be meticulous. The night after I caught them, I went into work without saying goodbye. Lydia tried to intercept me at the door, her face blotchy from crying, but I brushed past her with the excuse that I was late. Truth was, I was early. I just couldn't stand to hear another wave of excuses or half-baked promises that she'd make it right. At the hospital, everything looked the same. Monitors beeped, patients groaned, the fluorescent lights buzzed. But I couldn't focus. Every time I bent over a chart or adjusted a patient's my mind replayed the sight of Callum walking out of my bedroom with his tie in hand. By 2 a.m., exhaustion dragged at my body, but my brain was wired. I sat in the break room staring at a cold cup of coffee, and that's when Noel walked in. Noel and I had been friends since college. He wasn't the type you poured your heart out to every week, but he had a quiet loyalty that made him the one person I trusted outside of blood family. He noticed the shadows under my eyes, the way I was chewing at the inside of my cheek. "What happened?" he asked simply, dropping into the chair across from me. I almost brushed him off, but the words spilled out. "Not everything. Not yet." I told him I caught Lydia with someone else. I didn't say it was her boss. I didn't say it was in my own apartment. Just that it happened. Noel listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Don't confront her yet," he said finally. "Don't give her the upper hand. Figure out what else she's been hiding. Because if she's bold enough to cheat right under your nose, I promise you this, there's more." That sentence clung to me like a hook. When my shift ended at dawn, I didn't go home. I stopped at a diner, ordered a plate of eggs I barely touched, and pulled up our online banking on my phone. At first glance, nothing seemed off. Rent payments, grocery runs, utility bills. But the longer I scrolled, the more oddities I spotted. Restaurant charges at places I'd never been, time during nights I was at work. Luxury boutique purchases when Lydia claimed she'd been window shopping with friends. And then, the worst of it, large transfers from our joint savings to a secondary account I hadn't noticed before. The amounts weren't small either. $2,000 here, $1,500 there. All within the past 6 months. My stomach turned to ice. I hadn't been saving for our future alone. I'd been subsidizing whatever life Lydia was building on the side. That morning, when I finally walked through our apartment door, Lydia was waiting. She had made pancakes, something she never did on a weekday. She tried to play the role of a doting fiancé, chatting about guest lists and honeymoon destinations, her eyes darting nervously to mine every few seconds. I nodded, played along, pretended to be half distracted by fatigue. But inside, I was studying her. Every word was an act, every gesture a performance. And I realized something crucial. Lydia wasn't just reckless. She was strategic. She wasn't cheating because she was lonely. She was cheating because it benefited her. That evening, when she left for what she called a late project meeting, I told her I'd be sleeping before my shift. Instead, I tailed her car. I kept 3 cars behind, taking side streets when I had to. My heart pounded in my chest like I was a teenager sneaking out past curfew. She drove across town, past the office building where she worked, and pulled into the parking lot of a hotel. She parked, fixed her hair in the rearview mirror, and disappeared through the glass doors. I didn't need to see more. My stomach was already twisting with confirmation. But then a thought struck me. Confirmation wasn't enough. I needed evidence. So I waited. 2 hours later, she walked out. And she wasn't alone. Callum followed, laughing at something she said, his hand brushing her back. They looked comfortable, practiced, like this wasn't their first time slipping into a hotel under the cover of late meetings. He kissed her cheek before heading to his car. She lingered, watching him go, her face lit with the kind of smile she hadn't given me in months. That was the night my decision hardened. If I confronted her now, she'd lie. If I punched Callum, I'd get arrested. No, the only way forward was to let them think I was clueless. Let them keep digging their own graves while I built the rope to hang them with. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience. I played the part of the tired fiancé, too consumed by night shifts to notice much. Lydia grew bolder, careless even. She started dropping Callum's name casually, praising how supportive he was. Once, she left her phone unattended, and I saw a notification flash across the screen. Your suite is ready for check-in. My pulse hammered, but I said nothing. I also started digging deeper into finances. I discovered that the joint account she had been siphoning money into was used to pay off a credit card under her name, one I hadn't even known she had. And the purchases? Designer shoes, spa weekends, and at least 3 stays at that same hotel. The kicker came one Saturday morning when I received a call from the wedding venue manager. Mr. Harlow. The woman said, her voice polite but uncertain. We just wanted to confirm the changes your fiancé requested to the menu and guest list. Quite a jump in budget. Are you still comfortable with the new total? My grip on the phone tightened. What changes? She read them off. An upgraded plated dinner, an open bar, a live band instead of a DJ. All things Lydia had once claimed were too expensive when we were planning together. By the end of the call, I had the total. $20,000 more than our original contract. And Lydia had signed off with my name. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at nothing. She wasn't just cheating. She was setting me up to foot the bill for her fantasy wedding, while living a second life with her boss. That night, I called Noel again. This time, I told him everything. Callum's name, the mug, the hotel, the bank transfers. He was silent for a long time before he spoke. You can't just walk away, he said. She'll burn you on the way out. You need to be smarter than her. Smarter than him. And that's when the seed of revenge began to bloom in full. The mask finally cracked 2 weeks later. I had just returned from a shift when Callum himself showed up at our apartment. Lydia hadn't expected me home. She froze when I walked through the door, and Callum's smile faltered for the first time since I'd seen him. He wasn't affectionate. He was angry. You said he'd be gone. He hissed at her, ignoring me completely. Do you have any idea what this could cost me if it blows up? I stayed silent, standing just far enough back to look like I hadn't heard. Lydia shushed him frantically, pulling him toward the hallway. Their voices dropped, but I caught enough. Not leaving my wife. Promised me security. Can't keep covering for you. Wife. The word burned into my brain. So Callum wasn't just my fiancé's lover. He was married. And from the sound of it, Lydia had pressured him into promises he was now backing away from. They argued in low, sharp tones before he stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame rattled off the wall. Lydia stood frozen, her face pale, her robe slipping from one shoulder. She turned, and for the first time, she looked afraid. Not of me, but of the mess she was trapped in. And in that moment, I knew. She thought she was juggling 2 lives, but both were about to collapse. And I was going to make sure of it. After Callum's unannounced visit, Lydia started moving like a cornered animal. She tried to smother me with attention, cooking elaborate dinners, bringing home little gifts, peppering me with forced laughter. It was clumsy, almost insulting. I pretended to be tired, distracted, still stuck in my endless cycle of night shifts. Inside, though, I was anything but distracted. I had a purpose now. The first step was securing my finances. Over the next week, I opened a private account in my own name and began funneling money into it. Every paycheck that hit our joint account, I split. Half went into bills and groceries. The other half disappeared quietly into the private account. Lydia never checked balances. She only looked at what she could spend. The second step was proof. It wasn't enough to know Lydia was cheating, stealing, and lying. I needed to build something that would hold up in front of anyone. Family, friends, even lawyers if it came to that. So I started keeping a log. Hotel stays, restaurant charges, Times she claimed to be with friends, but wasn't. Callum's late-night texts that lit up her phone when she thought I was asleep. Screenshots, bank statements, receipts. I built a file thicker than a medical chart. The third step came from a stroke of luck. One afternoon, I got a call from the florist handling our wedding arrangements. She was confused because Lydia had come in to make changes but couldn't produce the deposit confirmation. The florist asked if I'd resend it. I told her I'd stop by in person. When I did, she handed me the revised contract Lydia had signed. Not only had she upgraded every detail, but she had also listed Callum's corporate office address as the billing contact. I stood there in the florist's shop with the paper in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Lydia had gotten greedy. Greedy enough to leave a trail. The following Saturday, I arranged to meet Noel at a cafe 2 towns over. I slid the growing file across the table to him. He leafed through it, his jaw tightening as he skimmed. "She's burying herself," he said. "You just need to decide when to drop the shovel." I wanted to hurt, I admitted. My voice was flat, calm, but the truth hummed underneath like live wires. Not just her. Him too. They both thought I'd keep working nights while they laughed behind my back. They thought I'd pay for everything. I want that arrogance to cost them everything. Noel looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. "So what's the plan?" I told him. Step by step, the trap took shape. First, I called the wedding venue directly and arranged a private meeting. I explained that there had been confusion and potential fraud tied to my fiancé's name on the contract. The manager agreed to put a temporary hold on all changes Lydia had requested. Then, with my signature, I added a clause that gave me sole authority over the final paperwork. Second, I booked a consultation with a family lawyer. I told him everything about Lydia's theft from our joint account, the unauthorized contracts, the affair. He listened carefully, nodding, and finally said, "You've got enough here to nullify any financial responsibility for her debts. As for the affair, if you want to make it public, you've got more than enough proof." That sentence gave me a kind of grim peace. Third, I set about gathering the one piece of evidence I hadn't yet secured: undeniable, physical proof of Lydia and Callum together. It didn't take long. One evening, Lydia announced she had a team dinner. I kissed her cheek, told her to have fun, and watched her leave in a new dress I'd never seen before. 30 minutes later, I was parked across from the same hotel she always favored. At 8:07, Callum's car pulled in. He got out, checked his phone, and headed inside. 10 minutes later, Lydia appeared at the glass entrance, greeting him with a hug that lingered too long for any colleague. I lifted my phone and captured everything, her hand in his, the way she pressed against him as they entered the elevator. When I drove away, my heart wasn't pounding with rage anymore. It was steady, deliberate. The file was complete, but the trap wasn't ready yet. I needed one more thing: timing. That came unexpectedly, in the form of an invitation. Callum's company was hosting a corporate dinner the week before our wedding. Lydia wanted me to come, though she disguised it as a chance to meet her coworkers. I knew why she really wanted me there. It was a test. She wanted to see if I would play the role of oblivious fiancé, smiling while she paraded me in front of her lover's colleagues. I accepted. The dinner was held in a sleek downtown ballroom. Lydia wore a red dress, her arm looped through mine, her smile practiced. Callum stood at the front, charming the crowd, his wife at his side, a sharp-eyed brunette named Harriet. Yes, Callum's wife. I hadn't seen her before, but the moment I did, I knew she mattered. Lydia kept glancing at her, tense, like she was measuring every word. Harriet, meanwhile, wore the detached expression of a woman who had long ago learned to smile through discomfort. When Callum finally approached our table, Lydia's grip on my arm tightened. He extended his hand to me like we were old friends. "Adrian, right? Lydia's told me so much about you." The audacity of it nearly broke my composure. But I shook his hand and smiled. "All good things, I hope." He chuckled, but I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Throughout dinner, I played my role perfectly, laughing at jokes, asking polite questions, even praising Lydia's dedication to her job. Meanwhile, I watched Harriet carefully. She wasn't oblivious. Her eyes lingered on her husband's hand when it brushed Lydia's arm too casually. Her lips tightened at the forced laughter between them. And then I knew. I wasn't going to ruin Lydia and Callum in private. I was going to ruin them in front of everyone who mattered. Over the next week, I worked like a surgeon preparing for a complicated procedure. Every detail had to be exact. I arranged copies of the evidence file in sealed envelopes. One for the wedding officiant, one for Lydia's parents, one for Callum's wife, and one for the venue manager. I confirmed with my lawyer that all contracts tied to my name were voided. I even had him draft a cancellation clause for the wedding itself, ensuring I wouldn't lose a cent when I pulled the pin. Meanwhile, Lydia grew more and more radiant. She thought her world was falling into place. Callum still on the hook, The wedding days away, me too distracted to notice. She had no idea she was walking into a minefield. The night before the wedding, Lydia tried to seduce me. She wore silk, poured champagne, whispered about our new life together. I let her. I smiled, kissed her, played along. But inside, I was cold stone. Because I knew by this time tomorrow, she wouldn't be standing beside me at an altar. She'd be standing in the wreckage of her own lies. And I was going to light the match myself. The morning of the wedding should have been a blur of nerves, flowers, and laughter. Instead, I woke with the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. Lydia was humming in the kitchen, still in her robe, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. I watched her for a moment from the bedroom doorway, and all I could see was the mug from that first morning. World's best boss. That was the beginning of the end, and now we were hours away from the finale. By noon, the venue was buzzing with activity. Guests arrived in polished cars, photographers snapped candid smiles, and Lydia flitted about in her gown like a queen awaiting coronation. Her parents beamed with pride. Her bridesmaids gushed. On the surface, it was perfect. But behind the scenes, my trap was set. The officiant had an envelope tucked discreetly inside his binder. Harriet, Callum's wife, had one slipped into her handbag that morning by courier. Lydia's parents had theirs delivered the previous evening, and the venue manager had a copy waiting in her office safe. Every key player held a piece of the truth. I stood at the altar, my suit pressed, my tie straight, my face unreadable. Lydia entered to gasps of admiration, her veil trailing behind her, her smile bright enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. For a split second, she caught my eyes, searching for love, reassurance. I gave her a small nod. She mistook it for devotion. The officiant began. His voice filled the hall, steady and warm, guiding us through the motions. Lydia squeezed my hand, her fingers trembling with excitement. Then came the vows. She went first, her voice quivering with rehearsed emotion. She spoke of loyalty, of building a life together, of how I had been her anchor. The guests sighed. Her mother dabbed at her eyes. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. When it was my turn, I reached into my jacket pocket. Not for a ring, but for the envelope. The officiant faltered slightly when I handed it to him, but he recovered quickly. He opened it, scanned the first page, and his expression hardened. Before we continue, he said, his voice sharper now, there's something that needs to be addressed. A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Lydia turned to me, her smile flickering. The officiant began to read. Not vows, not blessings, but the truth. He read excerpts from my file, dates, receipts, transfers, hotel stays billed to Lydia's hidden account, a transcript of her emails to Callum, the unauthorized contracts tied to the wedding. Gasps filled the room. Lydia's face drained of color. She tried to speak, but the officiant pressed on, his voice louder now, almost ceremonial in its condemnation. By the time he reached the photos, printed stills of Lydia and Callum entering the hotel together, the guests were in uproar. Whispers turned to shouts. Chairs scraped. And then Harriet stood. She had her own envelope, her own evidence. Calmly, she walked to the center of the room and announced, I, too, have something to share. She revealed Callum's string of affairs, his promises to Lydia, the financial cover-ups. She spoke with the precision of a woman who had prepared for this moment her entire marriage. When she finished, she slipped off her wedding ring and dropped it at Callum's feet. The room erupted. Lydia's father stormed toward her, his face purple with rage. You humiliated us, he spat. Her mother burst into tears. Guests murmured about annulments, lawsuits, ruined reputations. Callum tried to leave, but Harriet blocked him, her voice low and lethal. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Lydia turned to me then, desperate, her hands clutching at her gown. Adrian, please, we can fix this. I stepped back. Calm. Cold. No, Lydia. You already fixed it. This is exactly how it was meant to end. Her scream echoed through the hall as I turned and walked away. Cameras clicked, guests whispered, and the carefully constructed illusion of our future collapsed behind me. The aftermath spread like wildfire. Callum resigned from his position within days, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the truth. His marriage crumbled publicly, Harriet ensuring every detail made its way into the right ears. The board of directors cut ties with him, the firm scrambling to distance itself from scandal. Lydia's fall was even harsher. Her parents disowned her, pulling their financial support. The friends who had gushed over her gown stopped answering her calls. The venue sued her for breach of contract on the fraudulent upgrades. Creditors chased her for the debts she had hidden under my name. I was untouched. My lawyer made sure of that. Every document tied to me had been nullified before the ceremony. Every stolen dollar had been accounted for. When the dust settled, I wasn't just free of Lydia. I was financially secure, socially vindicated, and armed with the knowledge that I hadn't raised a hand or shouted a word. I had let the truth do the work. A month later, I met Noel for coffee. He asked me if I regretted not going for something louder. A confrontation, a fight, a public screaming match. I shook my head. No. This way, they destroyed themselves. He nodded, then leaned back with a grin. Well, you've got one hell of a story. And he was right. Because in the end, it wasn't just betrayal. It was exposure. The kind that stripped Lydia and Callum bare in front of everyone they tried to impress. That morning at 6:45 a.m., when I walked into my apartment and saw a mug that didn't belong to me, I thought my life was over. But in reality, it was the beginning of something else entirely. Not heartbreak, not ruin, but freedom. And I walked away carrying nothing but that. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.